Hello, how's it going? In today's video, I'm covering The Long March and Cry of the Warsongs from Chronicle Volume 3. So let's go! When the Burning Legion had arrived on Azeroth, Medivh's wizard senses started tingling. He knew it was only a matter of time before they started their assault on Kalimdor, but luckily, the remnants of the Horde and Alliance had nearly arrived. Although Thrall and his people had left first, they'd got caught up in that storm and stuff, innit? So Jaina and her followers had closed the distance. Medivh's next task was going to be a bit challenging. He needed the Horde and Alliance forces to join together. Asking them wasn't going to be enough. They hated each other, so he came up with a plan to subtly lead them towards a face-to-face meeting. Then he could reveal himself and convince them it was all for the greater good. The meeting would take place in Stone Talon Peak. This mountain was located south of the world tree Nordrassil and was considered sacred by local cultures. The only question was, would Thrall and Jaina even make it? Although they'd arrived on Kalimdor in different places, both would need to cross harsh terrain and survive against savage wildlife. As the days passed, both groups wondered whether this was even bloody worth it. Was there really hope in this land, or was it all just a load of bull nuggies? Although the journey had been a bit of a ball ache, it had also been rewarding, especially for the Horde. Shortly after arriving, Thrall had discovered wreckage from the missing ships in his fleet. Grommash and the other orcs had survived the storm and reached Kalimdor after all, but they were nowhere to be seen. Thrall just assumed they'd forged on ahead, so he wasn't that worried about it. He decided to push forward, intent on locating the rest of the Horde, but instead of finding his friends, he found something else. A war between Tauren and Centaur, cow people and horse people. As he observed both races, he learned the differences. The Tauren had a connection with nature and the elements, practicing shamanism, which is great. The Centaur, well, they just seemed like a bunch of jerks. Thrall became fast friends with the Tauren's leader, High Chieftain Cairne Bloodhoof. The Tauren had noble hearts, but were constantly being forced into conflict. This was an injustice, which Thrall wouldn't stand for. His horde stood as a beacon of hope for races just like the Tauren. The misunderstood, the oppressed, the forgotten. They would fight to protect those in need. In a land called the Barrens, the Horde stood shoulder to shoulder with the Tauren. Their combined might crushed the Centaur, and they bloody cheesed it. The Tauren's nomadic existence was over, and they were ever so slightly pleased about that. Cairne offered Thrall supplies and even some additional forces so they could continue their journey. The rest of the Tauren headed west, into a grassy plain called Mulgore. There, they would settle, and build a permanent home, and eat grass and milk each other or something. Meanwhile, Jaina and her expedition were making their way towards Stone Talon Peak. She had no idea what she was going to find there, but she was hoping it was a weapon, or knowledge, or something so she could save the world. Finding food and water became a daily struggle, but the Alliance refugees didn't lose hope. They looked up to Jaina. She seemed determined as ever. To be fair, she was actually full of doubts, but she wasn't going to let them see that. After days of travel, the Alliance reached a lush woodland known as Ashenvale. This land was filled with resources, but it wasn't completely dandy. Just as they reached the foothills of the Stone Talon Mountains, Warsong orcs emerged from the forest with murder in their eyes. Grommash and his Warsongs had wandered the Barrens for days before stumbling across Jaina in Ashenvale, but rather than attack, they decided to observe the Alliance from a distance. What the balls were they doing here? Eventually though, the orcs were like, okay, let's just kill them. The Alliance managed to repel the attack with minor losses, but they were a little bit shaken by it. What the balls were orcs doing here? Jaina was eager to avoid any further assaults, so she led the refugees up the slopes of the mountain. Some stayed behind and erected defences to hold off any orc pursuit. Thrall and the Horde arrived in the foothills shortly after. They were annoyed to see the Alliance, but bloody over the moon to see Grommash and the Warsongs. Like Jaina, Thrall wasn't interested in fights with the Alliance. That wasn't why they'd come to this new land. He ordered the Horde to ignore the Alliance, but his command went unheard. Something weird was happening to the orcs. Ever since they'd arrived in Ashenvale, they'd become a little bit mental. Bloodthirsty, like the Horde of old. Grommash and his people were the worst. They repeatedly defied Thrall's orders and just straight up murdered Alliance folk. Thrall wasn't going to put up with this. He sent the Warsongs away in order to establish an outpost. Maybe some hard labour would keep them distracted and stop them from being jerks. Grommash obeyed, although he took it as a pretty big insult. The Warsongs are warriors, not builders, but they went to work and unleashed their rage on trees, chopping down large portions of the forest to build their outpost. This defilement of the wilds was noticed, and would not go unpunished. This wasn't orcish land, it belongs to the Night Elves. And we're leaving it there! In the next Volume 3 video, we're going to skip a section because it just recaps the War of the Ancients. But the Night Elves fight the Warsongs, so Grommash makes a questionable decision, and Thrall and Jaina meet. If you enjoyed this video, like, subscribe, all of that bollocks. Thanks very much for watching, and see ya!